Now, the rest of the story. Elzie Segar was in some ways the least likely creator of a cartoon superhero. But here he was, about to put the finishing touch on his creation, the catalyst that transformed his hero into a human dynamo. And the idea for that transforming factor had come from a real-life scientific study. Almost 60 years previous, a German researcher named von Wolf had measured certain nutrients in food, had discovered a particularly high nutrient content in one vegetable, 10 times the iron in that vegetable than in others, and so eating it would transform Elzie Segar's comic strip hero into a superhero. Have you guessed? And probably you're right. He was strong to the finish because he ate his spinach. He was Popeye the Sailor Man. You remember how he did it? He'd be losing in some desperate battle with a bully or a villain, tied up, or getting pummeled or something, but he'd manage just barely to get hold of a can of spinach, and then he'd squeeze that can until the spinach popped out and upward in a cartoon arc and straight into his mouth. Promptly following, his forearms would bulge and his anchor tattoo would swell to many times its size. And thus did Popeye the Sailor Man become the original Iron Man. Popeye made the first newspaper appearance in January 1929, and by the mid-1930s, spinach consumption had increased in the United States 33%. It all started, of course, in 1870 with Dr. von Wolf and his scientific analysis, which revealed an iron content in spinach equal to that in red meat. Oh, and remember I said Popeye's creator, Elzie Segar, was an unlikely superhero innovator? Well, you know, he was a house painter, not a cartoonist in the beginning, and the cartoons he wound up drawing, including Popeye, were simply based on neighbors he had grown up living alongside in Chester, Illinois. But what a hilariously enduring world he constructed from paper and ink, ruled by a cantankerous old seafarer whose supercharged tonic was spinach. And here's the thing. That scientific assessment of the nutrient value of spinach was conducted in 1870. Remember Dr. von Wolf? But in 1937, 8 years after Popeye's debut in the funnies, a team of German chemists reassessed Dr. von Wolf's assessment, and a suspicious decimal point, which Dr. von Wolf had misplaced somehow. And now, oh my, the iron content in spinach turns out to have been 10 times less than the original study had suggested. And so it was clear that there was no more iron in spinach than in any other vegetable, even lettuce. But the correction of that original significant mistake was completely ignored amid other concerns of the times. Of course, now I'm telling you, but don't tell Popeye, that the super strength he thought came from that leafy green rocket fuel was all in his mind, and yours, and mine. Only now we know the rest of the story.
Now, the rest of the story. Have you ever heard of a comic strip called Thimble Theater? Well, Elzie Segar's Thimble Theater debuted in William Randolph Hearst's newspaper, the New York Journal, on December 19, 1919. You may recognize one of the characters. The original cast included Castor Oil, that's O-Y-L, Harold Hamgravy, which was quickly shortened to just Hamgravy, and Olive Oil. The comic strip centered around the dysfunctional relationship between Hamgravy and Olive Oil. If you're wondering, Castor Oil was Olive Oil's brother. Other members of the Oil family made appearances, such as Olive's father, Coal Oil, and mother, Nana Oil, who was named after banana oil. Thimble Theater was not an immediate success. It slowly gained traction. By the end of the 1920s, the comic strip appeared, well, in about a dozen newspapers. In the January 17, 1929 Thimble Theater comic strip, Castor Oil and Ham Gravy hired a sailor to crew a ship for a voyage to Dice Island, the location of a casino owned by the crooked gambler Fadewell. That sailor man was Popeye. The story played out over 6 months. When the story was over, so was Popeye. He was just one of the many temporary characters created and quickly discarded by Segar. I say quickly, he lasted for 6 months, more than most. When Popeye's character came to an end in June 1929, the public demanded that he return. They wanted more Popeye, and Segar indulged them. By the following year, Popeye had a larger role in the comic, and it was picked up by many more newspapers. At first, Olive Oil was unimpressed with the sailor, but in March 1930, Olive Oil left Ham Gravy for Popeye. Keep in mind that this is a comic strip. A few weeks later, Ham Gravy made his final appearance in Thimble Theater. In 1931, Thimble Theater was renamed Thimble Theater starring Popeye. But as Popeye's popularity grew, the comic was renamed simply Popeye. By the end of 1931, Castor Oil, Olive's brother, had become a detective and moved out west. His appearances became fewer and fewer. By late 1932, a new soft-spoken and eloquent yet cowardly hamburger-loving moocher named J. Wellington Wimpy, who would gladly pay you Tuesday for a hamburger today, became a recurring character. By 1933, there was hardly a newspaper reader that didn't know Popeye's name. In that same year, Fleischer Studios began releasing animated Popeye the Sailor cartoon shorts. Popeye even had a signature theme song, and you can probably quote it along with me. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. I'm strong to the finish, 'cause I eats my spinach. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. These cartoon shorts were hugely popular, among the most popular of the 1930s, and they continued making Popeye cartoon shorts through 1957. Popeye also appeared in comic books, of course, cartoons made for television, video games. One of my favorite arcade games of all time was Popeye. Do you remember catching those hearts that Olive Oil was releasing while trying to avoid Bluto? Popeye has also appeared in advertisements in a myriad of products ranging from, well, spinach to candy cigarettes. Do you remember candy cigarettes? Man, those were the days. In 1980, the live-action musical comedy film Popeye premiered starring Robin Williams and Shelley Duvall. Did you see this movie? What'd you think? Charles Schulz, creator of the Peanuts comic strip, which featured Charlie Brown and Snoopy, was a big fan of Popeye. He said, I think Popeye was a perfect comic strip, consistent in drawing and humor. In 2002, TV Guide ranked Popeye number 20 on its 50 greatest cartoon characters of all time list. In the number 19 position was Mickey Mouse. The number 1 position went to Bugs Bunny. Of course, lists such as these are purely based on opinion. Let me give you an example here. Angelica Pickles beat out Charlie Brown and Snoopy for the number 7 position. Angelica Pickles? Last on the list, number 50, was Tom and Jerry. Very subjective. As Popeye would say, well, blow me down. So where did Segar come up with the Popeye character? Well, for that, we need to go back to the beginning. Elzie Segar was born on December the 8th, 1894, and raised in Chester, Illinois. While living in Chester, Elzie supposedly came into some sort of contact with Frank Rocky Fiegel. Now, Rocky was 26 years older than Segar. Rocky was born in Poland, had been a sailor, and immigrated to the United States. Rocky worked at a tavern in Chester where he kept the place clean when the place was quiet, but mostly he was hired to maintain order. He was a bouncer of sorts. He had a reputation for fighting. Stories persist that an injury during one fight deformed one of his eyes. They called it a pop eye. He smoked a pipe, spoke out of one side of his mouth, the side not holding his pipe. What supposedly caught Elzie's attention was that Rocky loved to be around children. He loved to tell them stories about courage, chivalry, and virility. Elzie supposedly kept in touch with Rocky and helped him financially. It is widely accepted that Frank Rocky Fiegel was the inspiration for Popeye. When Rocky died, he was buried in an unmarked plot next to his mother and sister. But in the 1990s, Rocky finally got his own headstone, which included the image of Popeye in the text, "Inspiration for Popeye the Sailor Man." So what about olive oil? It is generally accepted that olive oil was inspired by another Chester, Illinois local, Dora Pascal. Dora owned and operated a grocery store in Chester. She was said to have been uncommonly tall and lanky, who wore a long, black, fitted dress and even wore her hair in a bun similar to olive oil. 80-year-old Dora Pascal died in 1953. Many years after her death, her headstone was replaced with one which pictured the olive oil character with the inscription that she was the inspiration for Olive Oil, Popeye's girlfriend. What about Wimpy? As a teenager, Elzie Segar worked in the Chester Opera House, which was operated by John William Schuchert. It was William who paid for Segar's art courses. William purportedly often sent Segar to a nearby tavern to get hamburgers. William is believed to be the inspiration for the character J. Wellington Wimpy. If you'll notice, I said supposedly quite a few times when explaining the inspiration for the Popeye characters. We can never know for certain if they were actually the inspirations for the characters. You see, 43-year-old Elzie Segar died of leukemia in October of 1938. He never divulged his inspiration for his characters. Elzie Segar created characters that we all have enjoyed. Elzie's creations have vastly outlived their creator, Elzie himself. Although he only spent 43 years on this earth, his characters are about a century old, and I have a feeling they're going to be here for a long time to come. You know, my mother always tried to convince me to eat spinach. She would say, "You'll grow up to be big and strong, just like Popeye." But as you can see, I did not take her advice. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching, and now you know the rest of the story.